What's up, everybody? Welcome to Gamescast now, episode 94. I'm Alex. This is our conversational gaming show, and this is our bonus episode for the month of August, where I talk about just random things in gaming. Now, for this video, I tend to, in these Gamescast topics, talk a lot about a future game in a series, whether we know about it, whether we don't know about it, and like the possibilities of getting one. I tend to talk about that quite often on these Gamescast topics, and I really love to do it. And if you guys have any games in general that you want me to make videos on like this, definitely leave it in the comments below. But I want to talk about Star Wars The Force Unleashed. And I want to talk about if it's ever a possibility, or, just generally my mindset as to a Force Unleashed 3. Now, I guess we can just start with the elephant in the room. Is under the current landscape of things, under EA having the license with Disney, and we've talked about that at length before too, about how I truly don't believe this is a good idea. I don't know many people out there that do think EA having the license is a good idea. Under the current landscape, it's almost impossible that I believe we could ever get a Force Unleashed 3. It's a thing that we can all dream about, but EA has their own plans. Obviously, they're not very good, but they have something in motion, right? And they have their own games that they want to do. And I guess to give them a little bit of credit is Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order does take a lot of a lot of different games. It has actually, honestly, a little bit look of like an Uncharted / Tomb Raider with the kind of platforming and just going around the world, which they didn't even really show off at E3, but they really should have. It's in the extended gameplay of that game. There's some things there. And Force Unleashed is one of them that the game definitely, and you can just tell from the gameplay of Fallen Order that the game does rely a bit on the Force and on the lightsaber. And that's pretty much, Force Unleashed, the whole point of that game was to kind of maximize the Force talents, right? And to use the Force kind of like you've never done it before, more than the movies have ever done, more than really anything Star Wars related has ever done before. And we could argue all day and night about the success and how great or bad those games were. And that's another fair point to say as well, is not only does EA having the rights slow this down, if not completely stop it, because they're not going to make a Force Unleashed 3. They weren't the ones to make the first two. They have their own games in mind. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is, you could argue, like their Force Unleashed game, that story, single-player game. But at the same time, I think we could live in a world where we have both. But just under the current landscape, I don't see it as possible. And then you look at the sales and the current and just the reception overall, basically, of the Force Unleashed games. The first one I loved. I think everybody seriously fell in love with that game. Thought that game was a way above average game that I think surprised a lot of people. And the second game obviously took a lot of steps back. Graphically, sound-wise, things like that, the second game I thought was phenomenal at the time. I think it really did a lot of things in terms of kind of the engine and how the game looked and things like that. It did that very well. You could read the stories of it, and there's some YouTube channels and YouTube videos that do a really good job talking about what happened to that game. They were under a time crunch. They made that game, I believe, basically in like under a year. Okay, because they needed to get that game out fast. So there was a lot of things severely rushed. Where I believe if they had full time, if they had even a 2-year development cycle, but if they had 2-3 years to work on this game, Force Unleashed 2 would have been a phenomenal game. At the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily matter. And that was also and here's the thing. A Force Unleashed 3, it's more about not necessarily even getting a Force Unleashed 3, because could it work? Would it work? After 2, continuing the story, the way those two, even the way the first game ended, the way both those games ended, do make it kind of difficult to make a third game, or to make a sequel just in general, but it could easily be done for sure. It's not just about Force Unleashed. It's about, like I've talked about before, just getting new blood in these Star Wars games, and I don't understand how people could even think to defend EA. They've made 3 games. And one of them isn't even out yet. They've made 3 Star Wars games. One isn't even out yet since they've gotten the license to Star Wars. It's been 6 years, and 2 of them are Battlefront games, which are just, you already have that. In the golden age of Star Wars, were all the games that amazing? No. Force Unleashed 2 is part of that quote-unquote golden age where you would get 2 Star Wars games a year. They'd all be from different developers, but they would all be unique. They'd all be different. They'd all have some cool features in their own right. They may not be the greatest games, but they all tried to do something different. And that's what we had. For like 6-7 years, we had that. And Force Unleashed 1 and Force Unleashed 2 are byproducts of that. They came out of that era where that kind of stuff happened. Now, at the same time, Force Unleashed 1 succeeded. Force Unleashed 2 did not succeed. But at least it was a better time period overall. Like, overall, you look at that time period and say you could really find a Star Wars game for anybody at that time for different play styles, even different genres of gaming they had Star Wars games from. And it was actually even at a point where it wasn't like shoving it down your throat. You know, you look at games now, they have, you had like that zombie phase where every single game there'd be like 5-6 games a year, and we still are towards the tail end of that, where we still get zombie games. We have Days Gone, we'll have Dying Light 2, we'll have The Last of Us Part 2. We're still, and they're all trying to do things different. I'll give them that. They're not technically all, quote unquote zombie games, but it wasn't even like we were in a too many Star Wars game era. We had plenty Star Wars games, but I don't think people felt like we had too many of them. And I feel like it's easy. We could easily have that now. It's also the problem that the movies are having. You have even people like Mark Hamill, and I think he's under a really tough situation, but they say Star Wars fatigue. People have Star Wars fatigue. No, they don't. Star Wars fatigue does not exist. You know what does exist? People knowing the difference between good and bad movies. People are tired of bad Star Wars movies. Now, I like The Force Awakens. I like that movie. I hated The Last Jedi. So you have people, it's not because of Star Wars fatigue. It's not because we're getting too many movies or too many games too quickly. It's just that we want good games. If you came out with 2 Star Wars games a year, sure, maybe one won't sell. But will it not sell because it's a Star Wars game and we have too many of those, or because it's just a bad game? It's because it's just a bad game. Games in general don't sell because they're not good. I believe that. I think there are a lot of exceptions. There's a lot of exceptions of games that don't get the marketing. There's games that the publishers don't push enough. One of my favorite trilogies and franchises of all time, Resistance, is a really good example of that. That game got the short end of the stick and is a phenomenal game, but people for some reason just would not buy those games. It's not because of that. So, but here's the thing: the Force Unleashed games sold extremely well. They were very high-selling games. They were arguably the most popular games of that Star Wars genre. Yeah, we had Knights of the Old Republic, we had games like that, but Force Unleashed, those games were very high sellers. And when you look at, I understand the second game took a lot of steps backwards. We live in a world that if Disney did not give the rights to EA, I think we already would have gotten a Force Unleashed 3. I think some studio would have done it. I think if Disney ever one day takes away the license from EA, which I want to believe in my heart that one day that will happen, if we live in that world, I do believe a Force Unleashed 3 will happen. Truly, the only thing stopping it is EA holding the rights. I don't think EA will ever do anything with that. Again, they weren't the ones to make it. Their developers were not the ones to make it for the most part. BioWare, they still have there, and they are part of that Star Wars era, but they don't let them do Star Wars games. We know that from BioWare themselves, that they've pitched Knights of the Old Republic games, and that EA has just said no. So they're very much in it for not necessarily themselves. I don't want to paint them as like the most evil people on the planet. Sometimes they do things, they make themselves look like that. But, at the end of the day, they have their own plans. They have their own games. They have their own vision of what these games are going to be. And while we may not all like it and not all agree with it, at the end of the day, they know these Battlefront games. They want to make another one. They are dabbling, at least, in the story genre. And who knows, if Jedi Fallen Order does well, maybe we get a second one. Maybe we get another single-player Star Wars game, and it's a different genre. It feels differently. It's centered on something differently. The mechanics are greatly changed. Maybe we get that next. So, again, like I made a video a couple weeks ago, a lot of this stuff depends on the success of Jedi Fallen Order, and a lot of it depends on the licensing in general between EA and Disney. That's pretty much all Star Wars games rely on those two things going some direction. If Fallen Order goes in any direction, that's going to impact things, and obviously the licensing for Star Wars. I'd like to believe maybe after Episode 9, maybe when Star Wars starts to really change, they take a couple years off, they come back, maybe they ruin it even more, maybe there's less people into it than ever before. Maybe Disney then looks at it and says, hey, gaming, we need something to change. Maybe we can get gamers back interested in it because then they'll buy movie tickets. We just need better results gaming-wise. We're pulling it. Anybody can make a Star Wars game. That's my hope. That's what I think could happen. It's maybe if episode 9 is absolutely terrible and does bad, maybe that could happen, in which case I'm all for it. Guys, let me know in the comments below what you guys think about that. Could we ever get a Force Unleashed 3? And what do you guys think about, in general, just the state of EA with Disney's license for Star Wars? Let me know in the comments below. Make sure you guys subscribe to our YouTube channel, podcast. Now hit that bell icon so you guys know when these videos go up. And thank you, as always, for watching. I hope to see you on the next video.